Dobry wieczór, witamy na kolejnej części wydarzenia. Zanim przejdziemy do debaty, chcieliśmy jeszcze podziękować naszym partnerom. Jednym z nich jest Małopolska Organizacja Turystyczna. Festiwal jest też dofinansowany ze środków budżetu państwa przyznanych przez ministra nauki i szkolnictwa wyższego oraz ze środków ministra kultury i dziedzictwa narodowego pochodzących z Funduszu Promocji Kultury Państwowego Funduszu Celowego. Partnerem wydarzenia jest też miasto Kraków. Festiwal został objęty honorowym patronatem ministra nauki i szkolnictwa wyższego oraz prezydenta miasta Krakowa Aleksandra Miszalskiego. Dziękujemy naszym partnerom. And now let me switch to English for the debate. Good evening. Today we will be talking about how ape communication research informs studies on language evolution. And we are joined by Professor Zuberbuehler from University of Neuchâtel, who is a primatologist and specializes in animal communication and cognition, especially non-human primate communication and cognition. And Professor Przemysław Żywiczyński from the Center for Language Evolution Studies at Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, who is a linguist specializing in language evolution research. Give them a warm welcome. My name is Marta Sibierska. I will be moderating the debate for you, and I actually wanted to start a little bit from the basics. So many people, when they hear the phrase language origins or language evolution, they tend to think about something like history of different languages or historical grammar, and this is not what we are going to talk about tonight. So I wanted to ask you what language evolution is in your fields and how language is defined in your disciplines. Professor Zuberbühler, can you start?
Yeah, okay. So, well, thanks. Yeah, it's an important distinction to be made between the evolution of languages and the evolution of the language faculty, right? So, I think in the second case, what people are interested in is, sort of what sort of brain mechanisms need to be in place to have a language-ready brain, so to speak, right? So what does a species have to be able to do? Just in terms of processing the stuff, but then also in the human case, obviously to externalize it with an acoustic signal. So it's both systems together that we've got. And so when you ask, does an ape have a language? I think it really depends on what your definition is. If you say, well, language is largely spoken, expression of all this, then no ape has it clearly, right? And so, I think, it comes down to definitions. I mean, people have talked about bee languages for 100 years almost, and that's obviously a very restrictive definition. So, I mean, so here I think in my case I'm not too bothered, is it language or not? I think we're interested in the roots, what's similar, what's different, so yeah.
Professor Żywiczyński.
Okay, I'm a linguist. That's how I was introduced. So perhaps I'm not the best person to be asked what is language, because we study language from different angles, from different perspectives. But if I were to kind of dissect a relatively simple definition for the purposes of evolutionary linguistics, then it would be that it's a system of communication that is open and productive. That is, it has finite means, for example, sounds, that can give rise to, let's say, words that we can later combine into larger structures such as sentences. And it is open because it is expressive. So we can express events, we can express states, we can construct the narratives, such as the cat and dog narrative. We can also talk about things that were in the past, that will happen in the future, or are completely hypothetical. So that would be kind of the end point that we are looking at. And in language evolution, at least the way it is done by us is kind of reverse engineering. That is to see, for example, looking at comparative data, what must have happened in order to reach this end point.
Okay, so drawing a little bit more on those institutional bits in our work, Professor Zuberbuehler, you are often referred to as primate linguist. Is that a label you identify with? And as a sort of a follow-up question, as I imagine, but I am totally naive in this respect, in primatology training, you probably don't have a specialization that is called primate linguistics. It's probably something to do with primate communication. So how is your work different from what others do in this respect that it earned you this linguist label?
I think it was a chance encounter in Berlin because I met a linguist, Philippe Schlenker, which probably you know as well, right? A famous French linguist, and he got interested in some of the animal work. And it's actually, he's the one who coined this term, like primate linguistics or something like that. So somehow I got roped into this, right? So, but I mean, I'm extremely interested. Obviously, I mean, you know, it's what makes us human. I mean, there's no doubt, and all the stuff you said is exactly what needs to be explained. And so, you know, we're hoping by studying more the cognition really of primates to, you know, to get some idea, you know, what led to, you know, to this, you know, marvelous ability that we've got, you know, and so some things are shared. I think like what you've seen in the apes, sort of this sort of awareness of the other, perhaps even knowledge, ignorance of the other, trying to inform the other. What's also shared is how they look at events, seemingly, you know, but you know, nothing expressive. So they don't generate a sentence. So there's nothing generative what you said, right? So why is that, right? So that's really, you know, I think one of these things that need to be addressed. And so yeah, I mean, it is in some sense primate linguistics, if you want, right? But I think more important is really the cognition, I would say, right? What's underlying all this, yeah.
I actually first learned about your name when I heard about this study in which you and your colleagues scared chimpanzees with a plastic snake. I saw the material during one of the conferences. It was both comical and sort of ingenious, very interesting. You do both field experiments and lab experiments. So in terms of methods, do you see them as complementary? Do they have their drawbacks? Do you think both are equally important?
Yeah, I mean, so I think when you study wild animals, you really have to watch them first well and to understand what goes on. And I mean, like our students, before they do any experiments, they usually watch them for at least half a year and try and see what the patterns are. But the problem with observational data is that you rarely have strong evidence for causation, right? There's so many variables that can influence the patterns you see. And that's why experiments are great, because you can control one variable and then you get a reaction, right? And so what we're trying to do in the field is to keep our experiments as natural as possible. So, for example, the snake experiment, yeah, the chimp startled, you know, I mean, he jumped, but that's so natural, so normal for them. It's not, maybe not an everyday experience, but certainly every other week, you know, they run into a snake, and then, you know, they have to, they show, you know, they have a toolkit to react to that. So we're trying to do experiments within their natural, you know, everyday life, also because we don't want them to realize that we're actually messing with them. And so that's one thing. Now, with the lab stuff, there's just some things you cannot do in the wild, like, you know, obviously, like all these perception experiments, you really need them to look at a screen, and you don't want to bring a screen into the jungle. I mean, it's just not practical, you know. So yeah, so it's technical limited. I'd love to do everything in the wild, but you can't.
How is that different from what evolutionary linguists do in the lab?
Well, it depends on the type of evolutionary linguistics. Like we're usually working in the paradigm of experimental semiotics, that we do experiments, we do them with humans, and we put them into kind of ridiculous situations when they can't, we forbid them to use language. We put a number of constraints and kind of ask them, or put a pressure on them to develop kind of communicative system that would resemble language. One important problem in these studies are the communicative modalities, the problem of communicative modalities. That is, which communicative modality better serves to get communication off the ground, which is better for sort of structuring communication in more syntax-like ways, and so this is what we do. But of course, I mean, this is not how or we don't think we are going to discover how language emerged in this way. This is a certain element of discussion that we have to set against, for example, comparative study, and we have to sort of keep a close look on what is going on there. So there was, for a long time, there was this view that vocal chimpanzee communication is inflexible, it doesn't show audience effects, which kind of favored, for example, gestural scenarios of language origins. And now this picture is changing, and this is, you know, we have to keep improving our experiments kind of to factor in these new pieces of evidence.
And a lot of your work focuses on vocal signals, vocal communication in non-human primates. And a lot of other researchers in the field still focus on ape gesturing. Did you pick that other path because you find it more convincing in terms of like vocal over gestural scenario of language origins?
No. I mean, I think they're both extremely important modalities for an ape. There's no question. The problem with gestures in apes is they're very hard to quantify, right? So the ape goes like this. Well, is he catching a fly or is he signaling something? So it's you know, with vocalizations, you almost always know that it's an evolved signal to communicate, because you know the animal should be silent if nothing, you know, happens. So it's kind of, you know, it's an easier way to get to the core problem. Now with gestures and also with vocalizations, you can record them. You can do a Fourier transform, you can analyze them, you can do machine learning. You have all these tools to categorize them, measure them, do playbacks and all that. So it's just really, it's just a lot more easy to work with them. But that doesn't mean that the gestures are in any way uninteresting. It's just they're much harder to handle. And so we try and do it a little bit with computer vision. You know, like you film it from different angles and then you let the machine categorize. And it's really hard, but it works. We have a study undergoing now that at least can recognize sort of the major gestures. But it's a big problem, right? Just to be objective with gestures.
Okay, so now perhaps going a bit more into the gist of the discussion, if you were to pick like the most significant qualitative differences between human language and non-human primate communication, what would these be and why? Any of you can start.
Well, I mean, so one thing really is, you know, what you've just said. It's like this strange kind of silence when it comes to events happening, right? So why don't they report on this, you know? And also they are really caught in the present, I think, so a lot of vocalization is about the present, a little bit about the future, maybe when they plan which way to go. But like the past, I mean, it seems like almost irrelevant for them, to communicate. And so that's certainly one thing. And I think, we can ask, where does this all come from? And I think here we really know nothing. I mean, people have argued it's got to do with, humans being so really very, very cooperative. So this is always the kind of classic statement, right? So you could not have a group of, what are we here, about 100 chimpanzees that don't know each other in one room. Impossible, It would be chaos. But humans somehow are so tolerant that we can be together in the same room, focus on a topic together, on a joint activity, which in this case is science. And we all agree, we're happy with it, right? So there is something very special about the human mind that is not ape-like, So this, call it whatever, cooperativity, tolerance, sort of this sense of togetherness, and that, people have argued that kind of mindset requires a special type of communication that you can no longer solve with a very simple repertoire, the way that the chimps have it. You really need to generate meaning on the go to make all this, togetherness work, right?
So it's not only about perceiving information or information sources, but also the motivation to share about it, share it with others, right?
I think in a hunter-gatherer context, which is always like, the most important one to think about these problems, you have cooperation at every level. Like, the adults go out for the day, they gather food, they hunt, they leave their kids behind. No problem, right? Because there's older siblings, there's maybe grandparents, even unrelated group members that look after your children. Again, a chimpanzee mother, she does everything alone. No one helps her, right? If she dies, her infants probably die, unless they get adopted perhaps by an older sibling. But it's a very different level of how people interact with each other and how altruistic they are in a way, right?
Okay, and Professor Żywiczyński, what are the most important differences, you'd say?
Well, actually, what Klaus said about the cooperative basis of communication, this is one of the, in my view, and many people, one of the key features. So I think it can be underlined more when we talk about the language evolution or the whole social element in which communication is taking place, that we are prepared to share honest information with non-kin at a very large scale. And language, when we talk about the origins of language, we have to assume that language is a means of communication to facilitate this form of communication. So when we talk about language evolution, this is also the question about language, is also about the question about cooperation, this large-scale cooperation. I guess there are other things. I mean, I come both from linguistics and gesture studies, and one peculiar element about human communication is that actually we are languaging, that we are speaking but also gesturing, and these two modalities are related to one related to each other, and they kind of complement each other. And this seems to be also a very human-like way of communicating. So this is something that, like the multimodal aspect of communication, but here I'm talking about what is spoken and what is gestured. This, in my view, makes not so much language in the narrow sense, but linguistic communication special.
Okay, and coming back to cooperation, are there any exceptional instances of that in apes?
Yeah, so I think you're spot on. I mean, so if the magic potion is high intelligence, which probably, I mean, great apes have compared to, I don't know, a wasp, and cooperation, high cooperation, then I think we're the only primate, right? But there are primates that are highly cooperative. There's a few New World monkey species that also have cooperative breeding, marmosets, for example. But everyone who works with them says, well, they're really bloody stupid, actually. You know, sorry. No, but I mean, they're not. You know, this is a joke, but they're not. They don't have the kind of awareness that a chimp would have, you know, about what goes on. I think, right? So you have high levels of cooperation, but not that much social awareness, or you have a lot of social awareness, but, you know, not that much cooperation the way chimps do. I mean, chimps cooperate. It's not like they don't do it, you know, when it comes to, you know, defending the home range against neighbors. They, you know, even if one is in trouble, they help each other, they adopt, you know, all these things. But it's not a daily default the way we have it. I mean, we're cooperative throughout, everywhere. Like everything we do is slightly cooperative. The way we get into a bus, you know, we behave in a cooperative way. We open the door for other people. We let elderly people sit down, whatever, right? People we don't know. And it's just natural. It's an instinct. And you don't get this in other primates at this degree. And so what do you do? Well, you have to branch out. And so one option is to study other animals that are highly intelligent, highly cooperative, such as carnivores, wolves, for example, right, would be, and, you know, dogs for that matter, you know, who are highly cooperative, very clever. They're not primates. And so there you actually perhaps find you know, communication systems that are, you know, perhaps more advanced than what you see in a primate. I wouldn't be surprised. No one has really studied systematically wolf communication. It's shocking, especially not in the early phases when they, you know, when they do their cooperative breeding and you know, there's this interaction between infants and, I mean, pups and adults and so on. So I think that would be a way to go forward.
But would you say this means that hunting, or in general, like getting food, would be the most prototypical cooperative scenario in animals?
I mean, life is about food. I mean, in the end, right? So you know, I think once you have systems where, you know, individuals just don't do the job well alone, you know, like a hedgehog that just wanders through your garden and picks up slugs. You know, so once you need each other for being successful, be it cooperative hunting, be it cooperative childcare, which is in a sense also about food, you know, then suddenly you're entering in a completely new sphere where communication is essential because you've got to coordinate, right? There's one goal and different priorities, and communication is the tool to solve it. So I think if we see, you know, empirically, we should really look at species where, you know, where we know this is essential. How do they solve these problems? You know, a bit like how a gorilla group solves the problem of deciding when to go, in which direction, which is very simple. But so that kind of problems, you know.
Okay, and now a question to Professor Żywiczyński. Another such difference, or it is claimed to be a qualitative difference, is the presence of syntax. So in linguistic terms, we would probably define it as some kind of a set of rules for joining elements together into larger structures, such as utterances. Would you say that call combinations are enough an evidence of syntax in apes?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Campbell suffixation, like it looks like suffixation from a linguistic point of view, I would say. I mean, there are two elements when we talk about syntax. Of course, we can talk about syntax in a number of ways, using different definitions, appealing to different theories. But I think the two core properties are compositionality, that is, you derive composite meaning from constituent meanings. Like there is nice, there is cat, I can combine it and say nice cat. And the other is systematicity, that is the order or the ways in which you combine these two elements. Like you tend to put adjectives in English before nouns. And I think what we've seen in Klaus's lecture are examples of syntax, or what could be referred to as syntactic rules, where the difference in language is that everything what we do when we speak is we create syntax, and we kind of nest one structure within another structure, combine it with yet another structure. So it's a question of scale, but also it's a question of scale that actually goes into quality at some point. Right.
You've been nodding, so you agree.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, so, when I did that syntax, I think it was part of my PhD, I was really excited, like, wow, there's syntax, but I fully agree with you. It's some sort of like manipulation that you can do to meaning with that little trick. But that's, far, far away from, what we do when we speak, and so I think it is not just scale, it is really also quality. And so what is it then really? So, and to me, really, it goes into this bigger thing of not just reacting to some little aspect of your external world, but really to report what you have seen, so entire events. And then you cannot solve that with a little suffixation trick that nature has given you, right? So we're still in a way nowhere, right? We still don't understand what happened in our species that we do this so easily. And what's even more, in a sense, disturbing is that an ape mind seems to be doing the same. It seems to analyze events in the same way, according to these studies. But why doesn't he say anything about it, right? It's just striking, right? It's really striking. So, you can only speculate. I think we need more research, but it may be down to this lack of cooperative motivation that we have, that we love to share information. It's, if you look at a 9-year-old, she cannot stop reporting what happened at school, right? She has to come back and tell you every little detail that happened. It's in German, Mitteilungsbedürfnis, right? It's so strong, and you don't see this in animals. So something has happened, a few million years ago, maybe not even that long ago. So what is it? Yeah.
Perhaps to add up one important, I think it was mentioned here, but one important element or the difference is the fact that primate communication, non-human primate communications seems to be placed, that is, it's about here and now, whereas most of human communication is displaced, that we talk about things that are not here and now. Yes, they are either in the past, in the future, or somewhere physically, spatially distant from us. And I guess a lot of complexity that language has actually evolved in order for us to be able to communicate about these displaced events or chains of events. And then the question is why? Perhaps it has to do with the fact that we are such a social species and we live in relatively large groups. So it's important kind of to keep record of who did what to whom. And this is perhaps the social challenge that I guess our cousins also experience, but not to such a great degree as us.
Yeah, if I may, so I fully agree. So, I mean, if you have a cooperative system, then, you know, reputation is the biggest good, right? If you don't, you know, cooperate, then, you know, you're basically a burden to a group. And so I think this monitoring each other, almost policing each other in terms of our cooperative motivation has become a major obsession in humans. And as you say, that requires that if you want to share this with someone else, you're going to have to tell a story. Well, this person yesterday ran away, you know, when the mammoth came, right? So that kind of information it can almost not be shared other than by storytelling. And so if you're not always together, you know, like gorillas are always together almost. They know the relationship of each other. In baboons as well, they always know what's going on, you know, who is a good cooperator, who's not. But if you're not together all the time, like it would be the case in hunter-gatherers, then you know, so that's why people probably love gossiping so much. You know, it's because you can tell about other people's social behavior and rank them in terms of how valuable they are as group members, you know.
So we mentioned some differences. Now, what about the continuities or similarities? You mentioned that we tend to perceive events, at least some events, in a similar way as our closest genetic cousins. So what are the other cognitive abilities and communicative abilities that we share, or the seeds of which we can find in non-human primates?
I think one thing that was fairly quickly clear to people is that when it comes to the recipient, the monkey who listens and learns, then the similarities to humans are striking. I mean, you know, I had this experience when I started working in West Africa in these forests. It's full of sounds, you know, like birds, you know, monkeys, all sorts. The whole day, the whole night, it's just animals calling. And, you know, it's in the beginning, you have no clue. And then as you know, gain experience, you start to recognize, and suddenly, you know, there's meaning everywhere. It's crazy. The squirrel calls, and, you know, it has seen a snake because it's another call than if the squirrel has seen a cat. And the monkeys know all this, and you know, it took me, you know, months and months to kind of learn all this sort of, information that's available. And so they learn quickly, they learn fast, they learn long term, like, you know, with this silly little experiment there with the chimera. And so I think at that level, I think the differences are really just quantitative, not qualitative. I think the difference is really then when it comes to production, which we've discussed before. So I would say as recipients, they're much more human-like than as signalers.
Professor Żywiczyński, is there anything that pops to your mind as a significant similarity?
Certainly the recipient design, that is what has been mentioned here. I think also, like we've kind of underlined the difference in cooperativeness between humans and chimps, gorillas, bonobos, but we should also stress that they are relatively cooperative species that live in groups, which gives us a sort of a good starting point to look at or consider social cognition and also communicative abilities. So I would say that. Yeah.
Okay, so language evolution, language origins, they are, to an extent at least, speculative fields. So there is a lot of hypothesizing what and how could have happened. Are there any things that we, especially based on comparative research, know sort of for sure now?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, I mean, what's been said before, that when it comes to, you know, assigning arbitrary sounds to reference stuff in the world, I think a monkey can easily handle that, but probably so can a dog, you know. So it's not, I think the sort of learning between signals, whatever they are, vocalizations, gestures, arbitrary stuff, and things happening in the world, that's doable for an animal. So in other words, I mean, to me, that would be a key component for a language capable creature, you know, to be able to assign arbitrary signals to the world, you know. And so I think that one is shared for sure. You know, it may be a bit more rich in our species, but in principle, I don't see any difference. And I think what's also shared is the ability to generate sequences of signals, and again in an ordered way to stuff that happens in the world, again with recipients that can decode the sequence, and you know, so again that's shared. And I think what's also shared, at least in the grey apes, maybe not in other primates, is this awareness of the other that, as a recipient of your signal. So if you watch a monkey giving an alarm call, you don't get the sense that they care much if someone else has understood what they're trying to say, right? But in a chimp, you do get the sense that they at least make the effort to turn around and vocalize towards the individual they want to inform. And so that's not a one-off observation. That many people have seen this, and there's studies on that. So I think that would be a third shared component that you need to have language. You need to be able to try and tell someone and inform someone, make sure the person understood, right? So how far that goes in apes, I don't know, but certainly there is some effort to direct your signals at an individual, not just into the universe, you know. So, you know, and then, yeah, so that would be sort of, you know, three or four components that are certainly shared, I think. Yeah.
Anything else?
I guess this is both similarity and also difference that we see, like the prototypical form of language uses conversation, and this is not a very prototypical conversation that we are having, because you're kind of
Forcing you to
yes. But normally we would be, conversation is quite egalitarian. This is I speak, I stop, and then you can self-select and start speaking. So in humans, what humans do, like if you adopt like an ethological perspective and go with the camera, humans speak in this way. So this we see in humans and in how humans use language. I'm not sure that we see it to that extent in primate communication. I don't know what would you say?
Rarely. I mean, I agree. So, I mean, there's some anecdotes. For instance, you know, there's a chimp family, a mother with her daughters and offspring, and it's evening, and she would like to go up and build a nest. right, with her family, and they need to stay together for the night. So she gives these nest calls, the specific grunts that they give before they build a nest to indicate that it's nesting time. Her older daughter has seen a fruit tree and goes off and gives food calls. And then there's this sort of dispute almost, like, what do we do now, right? And then, I can't remember probably the mother must have won, So anyway, in the end, they nest. So that can happen. But, I mean, I agree that that's by no means comparable to, what we do when we engage on a topic, right? We share a topic, we talk about that, you say something, and we together develop this idea. And, I mean, there's nothing like that, I mean, it's just maybe the guerrilla departure studies are maybe, there's at least some sort of joint activity towards a common goal. But I mean, with what? With a grunt and a grumble. I mean, so it's, the kind of, there's some sort of joint commitment that develops with these calls, but it's not done by explaining anything about the world. It's just sort of to somehow negotiate and then agree on a joint activity. So, yeah. So I think I agree with you. I mean, there are massive differences here, for sure.
I also have this a bit silly question, which probably adheres more to imagination and creativity, perhaps. So in language evolution, what we do is we collect evidence, we collect data, we integrate data from different disciplines, and then we come up with different scenarios or models of language evolution. And we can speak of the vocal ones that put vocal signals as the first kind of communication that appeared in humans, or gestural scenarios. So I wanted to ask you, if you were to come up with your own model of what you think the process looked like, what would you say?
I don't have a scenario, really. I used to have one 20 years back, but no, not really. No, it's mainly, I think scenarios are important. Like, let's say you take a gesture or vocal scenario, because then you can expose the weaknesses in scenarios. Yes. So, for example, if you take a standard take on vocal origins, then if you look at modern humans, it's very difficult for modern humans, for example, to improvise an expressive system that would sort of use vocalizations, non-linguistic vocalizations. Yes, they find it very easy to do it with gestures. Yes, but then we have to account for the fact that most of languages are spoken. There are signed languages, and we know that they are fully expressive. They are fully expressive languages, but this kind of illustrates how language evolution works. Yes, so we are not, I guess, we are no longer sort of in this play where we want to build a scenario or prove a scenario, but rather look for pieces of evidence and falsify scenarios, if anything.
So we are eliminating possibilities. Perhaps one last question. Was there anything in your research that sort of changed the way you approached the topic and the relation between human, non-human animals, something that really surprised you and had a huge impact in this respect? Any revelation of a sort?
I mean, I continue to be surprised. I mean, it's just really like, you go off, you plan a study, you work with researchers who actually go and collect the data. They come back. Usually what you've planned didn't work at all, right? You have to somehow, work with what's happening with the reality. They bring back all these observations, this data, and then you suddenly start to see what's going on, And for example, the gorillas, we didn't plan this. We wanted to do a study in syntax, and there wasn't much happening. And then, she comes back with all these observations about how they coordinate departures. And then you start looking into it, and yet you find something else. So it's this thing like going into the wild, see what they do, document it with the high quality data that you can get, and then you let the data speak, So sorry, that wasn't a very clear answer, but it's really like that. It's just, yeah.
Constant surprise. In your discipline?
Okay. Once I was fascinated with Robin Dunbar's scenario, that is the vocal grooming scenario of language origin, when because of hominin groups grew bigger, we needed some kind of a more effective way of grooming, and it was vocal grooming. And it kind of tied in very nicely with the social brain hypotheses. But then I saw, when I started studying gestures, and when I saw how easily people improvise gestures, or they are able to invent sort of little language-like systems on the fly, then this for me kind of was an important moment that kind of pushed me into this direction.
Okay, let's conclude with that. Give thanks to our speakers. And now we have some time for questions to both of our speakers here. You are free to ask them either in English or in Polish. We will translate if need be. Okay.
So I have a question to Professor Żywiczyński. So you mentioned at the beginning of the talk some methods that you use in your lab, and I was just wondering if there's anything we can learn about the evolution of language from the process of learning a foreign language.
Well, yes and no. What we can learn is what are the constraints, for example, that will push people, for example, to develop sort of syntactic structures. What are the conditions, for example, that will be better for people to improvise meaning? To give an example, when faced with the situation where you're not able to communicate with somebody, people will resort to different signs that we call iconic. That is, the form resembles the meaning. So when I want to talk about, I don't know, triangle, I will make this gesture. And this is what people do, not communicating about triangles, of course. So this gives us a picture, which, for example, modalities are better for the emergence of getting the system, of communicative system of the ground. But we are not claiming, like putting people in those different experiments, we are not claiming that we are actually recreating what has happened in our evolutionary past. Yes, we are just want to study or see certain constraints or certain facilitators that could have contributed to that. And for example, against this background, we sort of evaluate questions. Are gestural scenarios probable? Are vocal scenarios probable? What is vocalization good for? What is gesture good for? So we do it in this spirit.
Any other questions?
I think we can say that the language is a produce of our brain, but does the language influence our brain?
So basically, depending on what language you speak, you think differently. That's your point, yeah. I think that's an old problem in linguistics, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, where, basically, I don't know, like Inuit, have famously different, names for white. Apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but that would be an example where, where your language then probably kind of, refines your concepts that you have. So that if I look at snow, it's just white. But if an Inuit looks at snow, he probably sees very different categories of snow, right? That's probably what you mean, right? So in that sense, yes, I would say.
Isn't there a link between animal languages and languages of tribes, primitive tribes like Bushmen in Africa? Professor Roman Stopa, Polish linguist, lived with Bushmen in South Africa for a year or something like that in the 30s, in the 20th century. And he spoke the language of clicks. This was a language of clicks, very primitive, and he thought it was a link. I was fortunate enough to have met him because he lived to be over 100 years old. Thank you.
From what we know from typological linguistics nowadays is that languages of closed, of closed communities that tend to be small also tend to be quite complex, much more complex than languages that are widely spoken, like lingua francas, like English, Swahili, or Chinese, at least morphologically. So in fact, the evidence that we are getting goes the other way around. That is, languages of smaller, more traditional groups tend to be more complex, and this is a fact. It is, it can be, or there are different explanations of this phenomenon. One is that once language grows bigger, it gets more and more people for whom it is not the first language. And if children are able to acquire language of any complexity, people for whom this is the second language are not able. And we see in this kind of evolution of lingua francas that at least morphologically or syntactically they become simpler. I don't know what is the connection about clicks and primate vocal behavior. So,
I mean, I fully agree. I mean, also the way I understand it is exactly like that. First of all, there is no primitive language, right? I mean, each language has its own structure and the lexicon. And if anything, yeah, they are a lot more complex than things like, you know, French, English, or Polish for that matter. And so, but with the clicks, I think that's just another part of the phonetic repertoire that you can learn to produce. So if your children had grown up with this Bushman, they would be able to produce these clicks, no problem. But at a certain age, for most sound units, like after sort of 7-8 years of age, you really struggle to get them done in a native way. So I think it's just one, you know, each language has a particular collection of sounds that they do, and the clicks are one way by which you can solve the problem of communicating. I mean, that's probably how people would think about it today.
I guess we have time for one more question. Okay. Oh, yeah.
In terms of primates, you've been mostly referring to chimpanzees. What are the differences, for example, between chimpanzees and gorillas in terms of communication?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks. So, I think in terms of the vocal repertoire, it's quite a massive difference. So, chimpanzees and bonobos, they live in relatively large groups of up to 100, sometimes more individuals. They have a really complicated social system with males forming the core of the group, and they're born there, they stay there, and the females migrating. So chimpanzee females, when they're in puberty, like 13, 14, they usually leave and immigrate into a neighboring group. So you have a whole a complex layer of social relationships, which you don't have in gorillas. Right? In gorillas has the sort of very basic mammalian social system with one dominant male with a couple of females, and he mates with them, has offspring with them. At some point he's old, he gets kicked out, and then a new male comes in and takes over. So that's the sort of standard way. And interestingly, this simple social system in gorillas is correlated with a simple vocal system. And so I think what you see is that vocal behavior co-evolves with complexity, social complexity. And I think it's good that you point this out. It should have been mentioned more clearly, because the trajectory to humans is exactly also like that, right? Our social system arguably is way more complicated than that of a chimpanzee, you know, because we have this ability to deal with strangers and unrelated individuals, which chimps cannot do. And so there is certainly something to be learned of the relationship between the social system of a species and its richness, communicative repertoire.
All right, and with this, we need to conclude. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your questions. And once again, please give a round of applause to our speakers.